No, I want it to be impossible to tell which one it is. How
My
dare
5
you?
cost is golden.
Developing that idea further. If they all have the same skin and look identical, but they all have random traits, right? So like it's like a mutant variation.
I mean, they're just this is all just confirmed.
I was gonna say, what do you mean developing this idea? It's coming.
We just play tested it, right? And it went pretty well.
True.
Silka will be a transformer. That's the best take out of that.
All right, perfect. I think we're good to get started. We got just almost 200 people here. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today we're doing a Q&A with Riot. It's going to be amazing. Just for awareness, this Q&A audio will be recorded for records and future reference. So if you ever got to tune out, don't worry, we got you covered. And to our speakers, just be aware. We're going to do some intros here, and then we're going to jump straight into it. So today joining us, we have TJ Riot Green, Tej Boris, him, product lead at Teamfight Tactics, and TJ has been at Riot for 6 years and currently leads the vision and strategy for TFT. Hello, thank you for joining us.
Hey.
Beautiful. We have Brad Riot Blizz Delaire, him, game designer who came from the LoL side, where he first worked as a professional League of Legends analyst, and then went on to help design Samir and Viego. Thank you for those contributions. He also has a bearded dragon. Hello, Brad.
Hello. My bearded dragon's name is also Viego.
Is it actually? That's pretty cool. Also joining us, we have Ananda Lord Lama Gupta. Him, senior game designer manager with over 18 years of industry experience in RTS and turn-based strategy games. Ananda has brought his tactical expertise over to lead design of our labs, so Hyperroll and Double Up. Ananda, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I mean, the labs, it's been great to work on the labs, but I don't know if I'll ever do better work than the Viego emote from the Set 5 pass.
Oh, we have the Viego emote. Can I see some Viego emotes in chat? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Also joining us, we have Christine, Riot Fire and Rain Lie. Her. Producer for cosmetics on TFT, writer for 7 years, cat mom, and member of the NPC, the No Pivot Club.
Hey everyone, it's really nice to be here today. And yes, I don't pivot. I currently just play Challenger.
And what is the name of your cat?
So it's Lexi and Lulu. I did not name her Lulu after the champ. I actually got them named like that, and I was like, oh, these are cute names, so I haven't changed it. So they just turned 8 actually. So
Amazing, beautiful. We also have joining us Chloe Alice of Clubs Right, them, technical game designer, not quite a game designer, not quite an engineer, designs and implements traits, spells, and developer tools.
Yeah. Hello. I am a game designer and an engineer. I'm also a member of the pivot to exactly whatever my augments tell me to go and completely ignore the shop. I'm gonna greed for something that's gonna match the whatever augments I get in the augment shop in the minion round forever.
Amazing. And last but not least, a wonderful man who needs no introduction.
Well, good. I didn't want one anyway.
Steven Mortog.
Literally, he needed no introduction.
Perfect.
Game design director with 11 years at Nintendo over 4 at Riot. 4 years at Riot. Is that correct?
I'm actually at 5 now, 5.5.
Oh, 5, 2022. And legend has it that Mortdog is responsible for your bad luck, but if so, he must also be responsible for your good luck. So my first question of the day, Mort, is how many monitors do you actually have when you watch all of us play TFT?
I mean, I can only really get about 12 going, but each one carries like 4 games, so that way I can constantly monitor all the different regions and Mortdog everybody. So
fantastic. Now we know the truth. So everyone, today we have a lot of questions and some amazing topics to discuss. For our first topic for today, we're just going to cover some get to know you questions. These questions were not directed at anyone, but really I think it's a good place for us to start and just get to know each other a little bit better. If you want to take turns answering all of these questions, and then as we move on to the next section, it's pretty much up for grabs unless the question's directed at someone. I'll let you know. Whoever wants to answer it can go ahead and give it a shot. Sound good?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Perfect, great. So our
And-
first question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I said I'm in.
Perfect. Our first question comes from Hestia. My dream is to join the TFT dev team. How did you come to get your position, and how would you recommend getting there? Anyone who wants to go first, go ahead.
I can
Otherwise-
go first.
Sure.
Actually, I've Riot has been the only place I've ever worked at. And throughout my 7 years, I've changed multiple different jobs, and finally got to TFT. So if you feel like, Riot or whichever workplace is the one that you want to join, I'd start for looking for any roles that are open that you might be able to get into. Like, it doesn't, I think, not hyper focusing on the specific role sometimes can be helpful as well, and being open to any opportunities. I started out in player support, and I worked my way up through publishing, localization, and live ops. So I used to work in the more tech background, but now I jumped over as a producer, and that's how I got to TFT. So I would say that anything that you feel like you're interested in, just go for it. And yeah.
I can go next because mine's very similar advice to Christine's. I started Riot as a digital marketing associate 6 years ago. Completely unrelated to what I do today. Was making like ads for League of Legends. Find something that is relatively interesting, because I think Riot is a really great place in being able to kind of find that passion that you love, and they're open to letting you move towards it. So if Riot is your passion, is your dream, work towards something that, don't get too hung up on the specifics of if this is the final thing you want to be going for, but something that you find relatively interesting that can get you your first foot into the door. There you go. Right. And I think you'll find that you'll be able to kind of move around the company very, very freely, as long as you have the passion and motivation to do so.
I can
Love
go next. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Aneta.
Okay. So I got my start in the industry in 2003, which is a long time ago. And partly through board game design, but also finding like a good studio fit. In my case, I ended up I found a QA job at a studio that made strategy games in Maryland. And once I was in there, it was a healthy team culture that allowed a lot of feedback, and that let me move into game design pretty quickly. I think that if there's a particular game you're interested in, understanding what that game does really well and what the components are of that team will help you sort of be able to demonstrate a fit with it, with the team or with the studio. And so I think the other thing that's changed since 2003 is the fan communities and the availability of tools. And I'm not necessarily talking about TFT here, but really allow you to show how much you understand a game by making stuff for it. Like when I worked on the Elder Scrolls Online, we anyone who had used Skyrim level building tools or Oblivion level building tools to build something that showed how much they understood the Elder Scrolls universe and how much they understood what good gameplay looked like was that was always something that just really piqued our interest.
That's a pretty good transition into my story, because it's similar, except significantly not as long ago. Like, I was an analyst in the professional league scene, so insert an LCS or an LEC team, and I probably either worked for them or had talks with them. And that proved my knowledge of a game. And so that allowed me to get a spot on Riot's playtest team, which eventually evolved into the game analysis team. And from there, I was able to meet with a lot of different game designers, and learn from them and learn their craft. And I wanted to have my title officially be a game designer and learn more about the craft, further my career, and have a new challenge. And so TFT was just a perfect fit.
So I started working in the game industry as in QA as an intern, and at the time I wanted to be a game designer, but I was given advice to pursue something that was less of the brass ring, i.e., that wasn't the thing everyone wanted to do. So I decided to change my major to engineering, became an engineer, got a job here as an engineer, and then ultimately became a tech designer. I don't know that the advice that I received was good necessarily, or that I would pass it on to others, but it is what I did. Also, I saw someone ask in the chat if Riot preferred specialists or generalists, and I saw that Christine answered that, but I also want to say, I think if there is one of those that you tend toward, Riot as a whole isn't going to say, oh, we're not going to hire you because you're a specialist, you've specialized in something, or we're not going to hire you because you're too much of a generalist. If there's something you really feel like you want to specialize in, you should do that. And if there's something that and if you would rather be more of a generalist, then that will be okay too.
And I think, Mort, did you answer this one?
Was muted. Sorry. I mean, yeah. Generally, for me, I've told the story before, but basically, I went to school to become a game designer. I always wanted to be a game designer, so I went to DigiPen. They actually got a degree in programming because at the time they didn't do engineering, or they didn't do design, and ended up getting an internship at Nintendo while I was there. And then the rest is pretty much history. So for me, it was pretty straightforward. It's like I wanted to do this, went to school for it, and you know, ended up here. Long trail from there, but yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, and thank you so much for being here. We're gonna hop into the questions here. So Cloak asks, out of all the sets, what is your favorite mechanic / champion you've worked on? Does it compare well to its viability? I'm assuming they're asking, are you happy with how well they did in terms of the set? Just so the audience has a better idea of like what you guys have actually worked on for TFT. Sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Probably my favorite, like overall favorite mechanic that I have worked on is probably augments, which I worked on a lot, but that's feels like a cheap answer. So I think my favorite champion that I've worked on for TFT is probably Rel from set 5. Not that there is anything like, I don't know, not because of anything necessarily super special about her or her kit, but because she was the first champion that I like came up with an idea for, implemented, and brought to completion. And also, I just really like playing around that sort of like shieldy and CCE play pattern. But my favorite things that I've worked on that I am most excited to play are actually things that are coming soon. So,
True.
yeah.
Soon TM, I love it.
I'll jump in real quick and say the two favorites for me. One is Galaxies, and it's not like the quality or anything like that. The big thing for me was Galaxies was basically made in like the last month because the set mechanic we were working on didn't quite work out, and so that ability to come up with something and ship it super quick and then have it resonate really well was super awesome. And then the other one is, if for those of you that have been playing TFT since set 1, you might remember when the game launched, there were those loot cubes, and the loot system was really rough. It was possible to get like 6 items before the first PvE round and everything. And I worked with Linda and redesigned the entire loot item distribution system, and used some of my Nintendo knowledge to do that, and had some doubters on the team at the time that were like, I don't know, and yet here we are 6 sets later, and that distribution rule is still holding up. That being said, it might be due for a rework at some point soon, but the fact that it kind of got to do that and sort of prove my first thing was pretty exciting.
Who would like to go next?
I can talk about mine. I don't usually work super closely on things that are mechanics or sets or champ related, but there is something I'll call out. It's a little bit unrelated but related. It's a feature that I was super passionate about and put together the very first pitch for, which then the team drove home and made an amazing thing of, which is Little Legend Scouting. That is still by far my favorite feature because I just love expressing myself to other people, going around the board when something crazy happens and all going and dancing around. And that idea, I think we've had for such a long time to how do we make TF2 more social. And I was like, finally one day, just like, I really want this to happen. So I just put together a very quick, shitty, Photoshop pitch of like, hey, this is what it could be. You could move around a Little Legend and go to other people's boards and like dance with each other and kind of meme. And the team took it, created it into a real prototype. And then in the first playtest we had it, I think we knew we had something special. And that's still by far one of my most favorite set unrelated features, but feature nonetheless.
That's one of my favorite features too. I love doing that. Like in game, it's great, especially when you're contesting each other. Just to go over there and BM a little, it's amazing. So thank you for that one.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention double up reinforcements, which they were just, it was just a really not only just a fun mechanic to sort of work on and develop the rules for, but also it was one of those times when in the first playtest where it's in as a designer and you see the reaction of people playing in the playtest, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is the right call. We may not have all the details right, but this is pretty sick. Like it's a really fun feeling as a developer to have that feeling when during early on in playtesting, we're like, yeah, we struck some gold here.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Was there anyone else that didn't answer this question?
I'm gonna skip this one because I actually work specifically on cosmetics, so I actually don't touch mechanics and champions as much. But if I answer questions like what's my favorite Little Legend, it's probably gonna start a war, so I'm just gonna avoid that for now.
Yeah, no problem. For the sake of time, we're probably just gonna head on over here and start hitting our topics. So we can start with let's talk about Little Legends. Probably the feature that we play TFT for the most. I know I see some tangos already in chat. I know everybody's opinionated about their Little Legends, but to start us off, Paper asks, how large are the Little Legends? Is the size portrayed in the ARAM their true size?
You know
And
what?
again, this question is out to anyone, so please feel free to hop in.
Little Legends are magical beings. Like they can be whatever size you want them to be. They can be. I'd say go wild and you can imagine whatever size you want them to be.
Amazing. And
No
how
limits.
long does it? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just said no limits.
No limits. Perfect. And how long does it take to create a Little Legend? Is the idea the hardest part of creating one?
I'd say that it takes about 6 to 8 months, depending on what we're trying to create, because there's creating new species of Little Legends and tacticians, and there's creating variants, and they're throughout like years. Even though it's almost 3, we've been learning a lot along our way, and basically realizing that it's very different. Like creating variants and creating new species are different. So I'd say there's tricky challenges on both. But I'd say we have great concept artists that come up with a lot of ideas, and then trying to figure out what resonates most with the players is the hardest part out of, I think, the whole process. Because how do we know? We can't tell what the future is going to be like, but how do we make sure that this is content that players will love? So that's what I think is the hardest part.
Beautiful. So following up from that, will you consider making a community event to allow players to submit their ideas for a Little Legends design?
I think that is something potentially we can do in the future. I think we're getting better at creating Little Legends. It's been a slow process, but making sure that we have the right process set up is important. Once we feel comfortable with all of this, I think that is the opportunity when we can start opening up to these opportunities, like league voting for I think it was prestigious skins, or I forgot what league does, but like we want to make sure that we are able to deliver before opening up that opportunity.
And this question goes to you directly. Has the team at any point considered turning Dango into a shape that's not spherical?
I mean, Lamp Dongo already isn't completely spherical, so I'd say that that has already happened.
Check, please. All right. Kwitowski, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Kwitowski asks, as a League player since Season 1, I've seen how skins evolved and how new thematics were introduced to a point where League of Legends releases content every patch. TFT content keeps growing, and I really appreciate the effort you make trying to release Little Legends, Chibis, Booms, and Arenas. My question is your long-term goal to get to that speed in terms of content releases for TFT?
I can take this one. I don't know if every patch is our target, but definitely more than what we're doing today. I think right now we release. I'll put cosmetic content as an entire category. Something I would say a little over every month, maybe even 2 months. And I think our near-term goal is to try and do something every month, whether that's an arena skin, whether that's a new variant of a legend, whether that's a Chibi Champion or Chibi Champion skin. I think we have the pool of content to kind of hit that target, but we're just ramping up the team to kind of get there. And we've also heard players want more, Dango skins as an example. And the only way we can do that is to hit that frequency to meet all of the demands of different fan favorites of different legend species, champions, favorites, arena ideas. There's so many things that we can do. We're really just kind of hindered by the current growth of the team, but that's our target, is to be a little bit faster. I don't know if it's every patch, but something close to that probably is the reality.
Right on. Okay. And along that same line, Kwitowski also asks, will you try to update older Little Legends to be like the new ones, like better splash parts and control +4, or will we be able to at least buy them directly from the store like the new ones?
Generally speaking, I know this isn't the most desired answer, is we try to focus on the new stuff. I'm not saying we won't ever go back and update something, but we want to invest our time on making even cooler and cooler things. So we don't have any plans for adding Control 4s to previous Legends that don't have them, but you can imagine if we do add a new variant for that Legend, it'll come with the newest bells and whistles.
All right, cool, perfect. And will there ever be specific Little Legend gifting, not just random eggs? Like if I wanted to send Chibi Jinx to my friend, could that be a feature in the future?
I can do this one too. Most definitely, we want to enable gifting for things that you could just buy for yourself for everyone. This takes time to kind of add those features and technology, but our plan is, yeah, if you want to send your friend an egg or a Chibi direct purchase Little Legend, then, or not Little Legend, Tactician, then totally. Like I think we really love giving the gifts of giving.
Beautiful, I love it. So the next question here is kind of a little bit of a doozy. I believe this is directed to Fire and Rain. The general theme for the Little Legends and Chibis has been cuteness, it feels like. Is that a voluntary guideline, and why adopt this one?
It is not a voluntary guideline. I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, where we have a lot of concepts that come in. Like our concept phase is really fun. Like we have different cool ideas, but honing in onto like what is going to resonate with the players is actually what is the difficult part. And we actually started putting in a formula that TJ came up with, and I won't share that. That's trade secrets. A formula when we create new Little Legends and tacticians, and most of the time, being cute is part of it, but not necessarily. For instance, some Little Legends are just a bit edgier, or like has different personalities compared to other Little Legends. So like really picking the specific characteristic that it has, and then focusing on that is part of it. So I'd say cute is not like a must, but trying to bring out their personalities is actually more important than that.
Okay. And similar to Little Legends, how do you think Chibi champs were now that some time has passed? How do you think they were as an idea?
I think they're great. I personally don't have any chibis. I know that's spicy because I actually prefer Little Legends. But I think it is something that players have been asking for. I know, TJ, please don't fire me. It's been what players have been asking for, and I think it's a great space that we've looked into. I've grown to love them throughout their art development process. I think they're also one of the harder content to make. Like, how do you make sure that we capture the champions specifically without tweaking it too much, but also making it a chibi? So I do think it's a great idea, and I'm excited for us making more in the future. And as you have seen, there's we also are trying to look into the skins as well, like Firecracker Jinx, which looks super cute. So yes, I do think it's I've always believed in chibis, and I think it has shown that it's successful.
Perfect. And with that being said, we're going to make a pivot here into talking about TFT units and traits. So our first question comes from Kata. Do you have a prescribed set of unit types that you need to satisfy when starting a new set? For example, do you start out with the desire to make a damage over time unit and a backline access unit before fleshing out which champs will be in the set? Or is it more of like a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, I dive into this one. So generally, when you're making a set, the thing to talk about isn't like there's a specific prescription or anything. It's variety, right? Like 58 champions that were all auto attackers and tanks that stand there would be really boring. And so generally, when the set designers are trying to fill out the set, it's like, okay, well, we're going to need some tanks. Cool. Those tanks should operate in different ways. So here's one that's a CC champion. Here's one that buffs his allies. Here's one that lowers the defenses of the enemies, and they start coming up with unique outputs. And the same is true for damage dealers. It's like, hey, we need a bunch of AD carries, and AD carries have different outputs. And so generally it's about creating a variety of outputs so that you have an interesting set with a bunch of unique champions. And so like I said, Dots is one of the examples where it's like Dot is a pretty cool unique output that doesn't exist on, say, Lux. And so making sure we have that variety is the big thing here. So it's not about a certain number. And if anything, in future sets, we're trying to challenge like some of our pre-understood conceptions, right? Like maybe having the 4-cost CC tank in every set is not the correct answer. Maybe we need to get rid of that in a future set. So, the thing is we've only shipped 6 sets and haven't had a ton of experimentation time. So prescribing anything now might just be, too limiting to future outputs. So.
Mm-hmm. And similarly to that, how does the team figure out which skin lines to use when designing new sets? Is it like predetermined? Do you already know we're going in with Black Frost skins, Commando skins, or do you come up with the traits in the units first and then try to match the skins to it?
I think there's. Oh, sorry. I guess Mort actually wasn't going to talk. All right, yeah. I think there is some of both, but we do a lot of going and grabbing what are the skins that are the skin lines, the skins that are going to fit into this thematic. How can we group them together into their origins? Then making origin, like origins being the traits that are like, I can't even think of one right now. My brain is broken.
Dawnbringer.
Yeah, thank you. Dawnbringer, Nightbringer, etc. And then the others being classes like Arcanist and Brawler. But so we look for things that are going to fit the origins, or that are going to make up origins for the overall thematic of the set. And then we come up with mechanics that are going to really sell those thematic origins. And sometimes we figure out that like, okay, this one isn't going to work. Like this skin line we were going to use isn't going to work. And it's something that we kind of can't fix because it's like the champions that are in it don't allow for us to create a good, viable like build out of these units for some reason. Because the skin line is all AD tanks or something. And then we sometimes end up having to go back to the drawing board. And sometimes when we do that, we have a mechanical niche that we have in mind for them. But mostly the thing the origins are thematic first, then mechanic, and then the classes are, okay, we have this mechanic we want them all to work around, or we need a mechanic that works for this kind of odd bunch of units. These 5 units need some shared mechanic. And we figure out what that mechanic is going to be, and then we decide, oh, okay, here's the thematic for that class.
Okay, so going off of that, so what do you take into consideration when determining which cost you want a champion to be when you are designing the set?
So when we're first starting out on the set, sorry, Mort, if you want to answer.
Oh, this is all you. Go for it.
When we're first starting out, we paper prototype the set, which really means we drag around little squares of each of the champions' portraits, like madly around a PowerPoint document, trying to figure out what origins and traits they're going to go into. We have a particular number of each of the costs that we're going to end up with. And we have in mind some champions that we're like, these are the ones that are going to be like the standouts for this set. So we try and make those 5 costs, sometimes 4 costs. We have some champions in mind who they have a really good skin for it, but it's that fits the thematic well, but that isn't necessarily super flashy. So maybe those are going to be lower cost. And we kind of start from there, from a place of like, what's going to be exciting to try to make a 5 cost of, or what do we have a really cool mechanic for in mind already? And then we hit first playtest. We like build out all of the things that we've been spent like 4 weeks or whatever iterating on paper prototypes of. We hit first playtest and we realize, okay, this unit's never going to work as a 5 cost. It has to be something else. Or, you know, we implemented this spell on a 2 cost champion and we were planning for it to be a 2 cost, but really it's gonna need to be a 3 cost. This is a little bit too complex, too powerful, or the opposite. I hope that is a sufficient answer.
No, that's great. That's to actually hear the whole rundown and what you guys go through is fantastic for me. Our next question comes from Bulls here, and he's actually asking, similar to what you were talking about, when designing late game 4/5 cost carries, do you guys identify what 1, 2, 3 costs might be viable item holders for them to help with the smooth transition into the late game carry, or does it just kind of naturally work out?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Hi, Bulls. Nice to see you. So this was a tricky one because kind of like that meme that was just posted in the chat, designing a TFT set is a very complex like Jenga tower, right? Where it's like everything needs to connect and there are a bunch of needs. And kind of like you're describing, right? It's like not only do you have to make a good 4 cost, but it's like, okay, but who's the item carrier for that 4 cost? How are they going to transition into that 4 cost? Do they have the supporting units around that 4 cost, et cetera, et cetera? And oftentimes a lot of the hard part of taking the step from like the set from the first play test into the actual shipping is a lot of moving those pieces around, right? Where it's like you play the set for the first time and you're like, okay, there's too many AD carries here and there's no good way to transition. And all the AD carries seem to want the exact same items. So we got to figure out a Ginsu's user and we need to figure out a blue buff user, et cetera, et cetera. And there are so many requirements to get everything in line. It's almost impossible to get it perfect. For example, I think if you look at Scrap on live right now, yeah, you can take Ezreal as an AD item carrier and then transition to Jinx, but I think that's a really painful transition. So it would be nice if Scrap had like a 3 or 4 cost. But with the structure, it wasn't really possible to make that true. So all of this is taken into account, but the reality is the needs of everything just end up being almost impossible to meet. And so sometimes you have to make sort of sacrifices here where we're like, okay, Scrap in particular is going to be a high risk one where you can carry that Ezreal and Ariel gets to be a little bit more powerful. But if you don't hit the Jinx, you're going to suffer, and that's an acceptable outcome that we have to deal with. So yeah, this is a pretty complex question, and it kind of is case by case, but a lot of the time we are taking those into account. It's just kind of impossible to hit everything.
Right, okay, definitely makes sense. Sounds like sounds like it's a lot more complex than what most people would think. This question comes from Most here. There are some units that thematically fit traits but don't have them. Examples he gives, i.e., Echo and Clockwork, Camille and Enforcer, and Victor with Innovator. What stops these units from having those traits that, in overall sense, makes sense for them to have it?
Sure.
So-
Go ahead, Clay. Go for it.
The example of Camille, I think, does a really good job of helping kind of illustrate the answer. If Camille was this one cost unit that also had Enforcer, Camille would be a one cost unit with 3 traits, which we try not to do. And Enforcer would be really, really easy to access. It couldn't be the trait that it is right now. It's different for every champion, but it's generally, we're aware that they have this awkward, like, oh man, funny that this unit isn't that. But it's for the benefit of the overall shape of the set versus really selling that unit as their own. Like, what are they supposed to be? We're trying to balance those two needs.
Right. It definitely sounds like there's a more holistic focus on it. Next question comes in from, it's Bulls again. He wants to know, are there any plans to bring a summoner type trait back? One of his favorites, and favorites for many others as well.
Yeah, I'm going to take this one because I'll be honest, as a Malzahar player from set 2, Summoner was definitely my personal favorite also. But the reality is sometimes as a designer, you have to put your personal needs aside, and Summoner traits were really bad for fight readability. Having an entire board filled with Malzahar minions and Zed clones and Tibbers, all of which each had health bars that were basically black because they had so much health because of the 6 Summoner bonus, was a little much and basically turned into fights going, I don't know what's going on, but things are happening. That being said, I think the problem with Summoner in set 2 was the fact that there were 6 of them, right? And they could each summon many things, and there was a lot going on. I don't think we're opposed to a champion or like a very small trait doing the Summoner thing again. We just have to really avoid that combat readability problem. So if we can figure out a good solution to that, we can make that happen. And yeah, someone mentioned like Ivern. Ivern's a small example of that, but even something like reprinting Malzahar might be okay in isolation, just not as part of a big 6 summoner trait.
Beautiful. Our next question here actually goes to you, Chloe. What was the hardest champion to date to implement, and were those technical implementations used for any other champion? This question comes from Matronic.
The hardest champion to date to implement is a little tough to answer, but I'm going to tell you what it made me think of, which is my current pet peeve when I play on live. In my opinion, the hardest champion to implement is the one that we haven't quite technically got working the way it was supposed to. That is, so you know Galio, right? He goes up into the air, slams into the ground, and that's very, very cool. But also, as you know, when he crits, he slams into the ground and has like a special effect that plays, and is very good and exciting. Here's something fun. At some point, I don't know when, the system that has the attack animations play got to the point where it is not reflecting correctly whether or not attacks are going to crit. And so that means the animation plays at the correct rate. So if you have a 25% crit chance, the animation is going to play 25% of the time, and you're going to get the effect 25% of the time. Those just aren't the same. Which usually when people are playing around Clapio, they build IE anyway, so it's sort of fine. But I keep about once a month being like, oh, I know exactly why this is caused. It's because for some reason we're re-rolling whether or not the attack crits in between playing the animation and dealing the damage. I know exactly what the problem is. I'm gonna fix this tomorrow. And then I sit down and I go through the same 10 files that control this system. And I remember that I did this last month and it does not fix the bug, and I have no idea where it's coming from.
Oh, no.
And it haunts my dreams. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Galio is haunted, as someone said in the chat. Our next question here. This one might be a little bit of a doozy. This one comes from Bulls. I'm just gonna say his name again to make Pikachu angry. What are your thoughts on Kale as a 5 cost and set 5? He thought
Sure.
so. Bulls writes, I think Kale had an interesting design, but felt awkward as she was hard to pivot into, and you almost had to force her to be viable. I think that part of that is from Redeemed Forest really being the only viable early game to pivot into Kale.
Yeah, so I'm going to preface this with I'm a little more conservative sometimes with the designs than the set designers, which is intentional. The set designers are supposed to be creative and crazy, and I'm supposed to go, God, why do you make me figure out how to make this work? And Kale is an example of something that our set designers have wanted to do for a while, which is a ramping champion, right? It's like your entire objective is to like let this guy ramp up, power up, and we see this with Kaisa also. That being said, I think ramping champions create this really weird dynamic where when they're successful, you feel helpless because it's like, yep, they've put together the very tanky comp that nothing can die, and eventually I get burned down and there's nothing I can do. And if you don't have that, then they feel like incredibly weak champions that you can't fit into their comp. And you know, we've seen both extremes of that, right? Because like Kale was like so comp specific, you basically couldn't play her unless you had perfect items, perfect comp. And then the opposite is when they're tuned poorly, you see Kaisa where it's like, as long as she has a GA and Morello, congratulations, she wins the game. Nothing you can do about it. So admittedly, I'm still skeptical that we're going to get a very good ramping champion, but I guarantee you we're going to take more tries at it because if we can nail that fantasy, it's a very exciting fantasy. But I think Kale, at least with the supporting pieces around her, just didn't quite work. So
Beautiful. Thank you for that answer. I hope you guys get ramping champions right because that's my crit Galio. That haunts my
actually,
dreams.
I'm going to jump in real quick because someone mentions ramping like Cho and set 4 Vygar. That's a slightly different amount of ramping. That's the kind of ramping where it's like they start really weak and then over the course of the game they get much, much stronger. That is a different problem set because that problem set isn't about like what comp can or can they not fit into. That one is about how early did you high roll it. Using set 4 Vygar as an example, you get an early 2-1 Vygar and start getting those AP stacks or a 2-1 Cho'Gath. Those are great. But then when you see them in your stage 4 or stage 5 shops, you're like, I don't have time to ramp. These aren't great. And so that's a different problem we have to solve, but also one that, again, I don't think we're going to give up on because everyone loves their 12k Cho'Gaths. So
Thank you for that. So we're going to move this conversation to talking about set mechanics. So our first question in comes from Tomato. Will we ever see previous set mechanics in upcoming sets, like set for chosen units coming back?
The answer is, will we ever see them again? Probably in some form or another. The question is like how to use them. I think, and the other thing is some mechanics are going to be different, right? Augments are kind of an implementation of previous set mechanics, right? Like I doubt we would ship galaxies in a world where augments exist. But that being said, maybe there's elements within the galaxies, like you see binary airdrop, which was basically us having a spin on the binary galaxy. Chosen's another one where like maybe there's a way to use this not the exact same but in a different way. We probably wouldn't go back to like shadow items, but it's just about finding the need. But the other thing I'll say is that we've kind of learned over time that TFT is a game that really thrives when things are novel and new and players are experiencing things they've never experienced before. So we probably wouldn't go back unless there was a really good reason, because a lot of players have already experienced this. They know how it works. They're looking for something new and different. So,
you touched based on it a little bit, but kind of ask: is there ever plans to play around with items again, like Set 5, or has the idea just been burned by the reaction to shadow items?
no, I think if anything, the item system is really pruned for a big improvement. Maybe this is a spicy take, but I actually think an item system overhaul is one of the biggest quality of life things we could do to TFT. That being said, I don't think the shadow items burned playing with items. I think the big thing it showed us was complexity high and Kiss Curse especially were really not good for the game. Because you had these really tough decisions. A lot of players were like just trying to make their army, let alone like infinity edges that would kill their own champions. That didn't quite work. So Radiant items were a much better implementation of this, where it's just like the item system, but better. Ornn items, I think, were a very positive version of this as well. The uncraftable emblems. So I think there's definitely still room to go into the item system and futz around, make improvements, do new things, add novelty. But certainly not in the shadow item direction.
Great. Our next set of questions are directed specifically at our current set's mechanics. This one comes from Full Belly Laughs. What was the thought process on keeping the emblem/trait augments separate from the trait-specific augments? Emblem augments feel like they could have been done with previous mechanics, like an armory or a tome. And would we ever see the total number of augments reduce? For example, like Bruiser Heart is removed, but Shrug It Off now provides a Bruiser emblem?
Yeah, so there's some interesting stuff in there. I think step one, though, is that when you're making a big system like augments, you want to keep the complexity fairly low so that people can jump in. And so an augment that did something like Shrug It Off plus Bruiser Emblem is sort of scaling that complexity. And I know for a lot of the engaged TFT players, they're thinking, that's not complex. But again, two things is greater than one. And so we wanted to keep it very simple. So something like Bruiser Heart is a very simple tier 1 augment, right? +1 trait. Easy to understand. That being said, ever since we shipped the augment system, and I would call it step one, and we've learned things needed to be improved. For example, with the hearts and crests, we added the champions. And I think Shrug It Off and the other trait-specific augments are another good example where right now we're kind of learning that, okay, these are a really awkward position right now where they have to be powerful enough to compensate for the risk of committing to them early. But if they are that powerful, then it leads you to the situation where when you hit, they're like kind of wildly overpowered. So as we continue to improve the augment system for this set, we'll be making adjustments like that. So for example, is there a world where Shrug It Off comes with a Bruiser emblem? Maybe. Is there a world where Shrug It Off comes with a Trundle? Yeah, probably. And so we can definitely make those kind of suggestions. But again, we really liked the augment having those simple things to get into, and the emblems and traits were something players already understood. So getting in there, good times.
Right, that makes a lot of sense, yeah. Full Billy also asks, why did the augment system land in its current form of silver, gold, prismatic versus assigning all augments to a specific stage, like 1, 4, 3, 3, 4, 6? It seems like there are clear winners in power level in each silver/gold/prismatic bucket, but is it harder to balance augments if they can only appear in specific stages?
Yeah, so our vision for the augment system was to increase, replayability and variety of outputs. And so your default stance when you're trying to make, the most outputs possible is let's start with anything is possible, right? You can get any augment anytime, anywhere. It's usually good to start with no restrictions and then slowly bring that back versus start being really, really narrow and specific. Now, that being said, your point about there being clear winners at different stages, it's 100% correct, right? A good example of this that we already had to act on was Innovator Heart. Innovator Heart at 1/4 was basically a free win because you knew from that point how powerful you were, that you could force the comp and hit that dragon and be really, really good. Innovator Soul being the more extreme version of that. And so because of that, we had to limit where that could appear. I think limiting where things can appear is a tool we will definitely be using in the future for like mid-set and other things, to try to make sure that the augments don't quite have the variance they have now. And I think prismatic augments are a really good example of this, where it's like, yeah, the difference between getting Enforcer Soul and level up on 1/4, not so great. And so definitely some room to improve there. But to your question of why did we start that way, the answer is to try to hit the widest net of replayability and outputs.
Beautiful, great. Thank you for the answer. Like, really, it's really nice to hear the whole thought process behind it. To finish off our topic for set mechanics, Benny Bomb asks, we have seen several iterations of economic traits where you sacrifice board strength to farm gold/items. What are your thoughts about making a trait that takes away gold while it's active, like reduces your base income to 4 instead of 5, for example, but has a very strong effect on the board?
I can take that, Mort.
Go for it.
So Mort actually mentioned it with like Kiss Curse design. It's cool. It's really, really cool, but it's pretty difficult to do in a competitive game. So like for instance, in like a single player game, like a roguelike, you can completely break the game in some way. And so you're willing to sacrifice a stat to get more of other stats. But in a competitive game, we can't just let players hit a point where they just win because they, you know, have a lot of stats. There always needs to be a chance for the enemy to come back. So the Kiss and the Kiss Curse can't be too high. And psychologically, negative effects have a lot greater emotional impact on players, especially in a highly competitive environment where your goal is to constantly get stronger and stronger and there's a high cost of failure. So like losing 5 MS for extra damage in a roguelike might be fine, but it can much more easily cost you the game if you get caught out like in a competitive game. This makes balancing the Kiss and Curse very difficult, especially when you factor in how opponents feel when they're playing against the Kiss and Curse. So like right now, a lot of players feel bad about when mercs pay out, since they think the reward is too high. So in this suggestion, it's like I don't think opponents can fully appreciate the sacrifice of the base income. They just see that you're getting a large payout, and they don't really know what you're sacrificing for it. If Kiss Curse can be done, and all these factors are appeased and accounted for, I think it's amazing and awesome. And I personally love to design things that are Kiss Cursey. It's really difficult to do. And another thing to keep in mind as well with the augment system is augments are powering up your army. And so something that powers down your army for a slightly more powerful up doesn't really fit that thematic. Like Shadow Item's thematic was that versus augments, which isn't that.
Right. Beautiful. I'm super happy that you mentioned balancing because that's actually our next topic here. So let's jump into it. Jordan H asks, "What's your motto for finding a balance between fun game mechanics and fair game mechanics?"
Yeah, so when we're designing a set, the thing to start off with is fun, right? We start with fun because the game needs to be fun. We want people to enjoy playing the game. Pretty obvious statement when you say it out loud, but like no one's going to play the game if the game's not fun. And again, we've seen this, compare set 5 to set 4 and 6. You really got to have fun stuff in there, otherwise no one cares. That being said, once we have the fun, the line we use, and it's a very clear line for us, is if this happened at the finals of the championship for that set, would we be okay with it? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is yes. But that is our very clear line. And so we want to make sure that anything that could happen. So a really bad example here is imagine if Vagar had a 1% chance to come out of Yordles anytime, right? And like, okay, so then 2-1, somebody gets a Vagar. Are we okay with that? No, obviously not. That kind of variance would be way too wild. So that's our line. But again, primarily we do focus on fun because we want as many people to enjoy TFT as possible.
Beautiful. And this funny enough, this question actually comes from me. So after you've designed the set, right, what metrics do you focus on regarding patch balance? So from patch to patch, what are you guys looking at?
Sure, I'll jump in. So basically, the ultimate goal of TFT when we're looking at balance is to make sure that everything, or as many different outcomes are possible to win with, right? We want as many different comps to be possible to win, whether it be reroll, 5 cost, 3 stars, whatever. That's our goal. As far as metrics we look at, generally the primary one we use is comparative LP delta, which is a very, very fancy way of saying average finish, right? So we can look at any point in the game, and it's like, okay, at 2-1, if I have a 2-star Ezreal, what is my average finish? If I have a 2-star Ezreal with Infinity Edge, what is my average finish? Compare that to somebody who has a 2-star Twisted Fate. What is their average finish? And if those start to get wildly out of line, that's where the balance is clearly off. For example, if you compare 2-star Kaisa in 5-1 to 2-star Jinx in 5-1, if the average finish is wildly off, clearly there's a balance issue. Now, the other thing to note is that's just balance, and that is just one metric. But the other thing that has to come into play is frustration. So we look at things like how are players enjoying the comps? How does it feel to fight against them? Assassins are a great example where it's like even if their win rate is like okay to low, players really get frustrated in fighting them. Nobody likes their main carry 4-item or 3-item Jhin getting instantly blown up by one Shaco auto attack. So we have to take that into account. So even if Shaco is balanced, he might not actually be balanced, and that's where a lot of like designer instinct kicks in. But that's kind of like the highest level version of what we use.
Another really good example of that is a Socialite in the most recent couple patches. It was like completely flat 50% win rate kind of thing in the data, but we knew as designers that it was stronger than that. And so like observing Kaisa and other Socialite users, we found that nerfing Socialite 2 would put it in that spot where the top end where you can stack 3 Socialite is still powerful, but it's not abusive. And then the splash is still good.
I'm actually glad you mentioned that because our next question here comes from Y Ando, and he's asking, how do you feel about stat sites like metatft.com? And I think this kind of ties in perfectly when we're talking about you guys have data points that you're looking at, but at the same time, the competitive TFT player also wants a little bit of an edge. How do you guys feel about all these sites that give these statistics, and does it skew the player base?
Mort, you can start.
Yeah, I mean, this was it's a very interesting question, but it's bigger than TFT. This is a question that every game right now, I think, in the age of the internet is going through, right? Whether it be Magic the Gathering, the card game, or Hearthstone, or League of Legends, or whatever. We're in an age where information is more widely available than it was 20 years ago. And so games now have to design around that fact, right? Where it's like, what happens if players just don't think about your item system and instead just plug and play exactly what a guide tells them to do? What happens? The reality is, I don't think there's a great magical solve for this. I think a lot of people are going to have to, design games around this fact, but this is the era we're in and we just have to accept it. So to the question of how do I feel about it, it's inevitable. They exist, and complaining about them does no good. Yeah, I wish players would, play more and do more stuff, but again, the reality is that's not the world we live in, and so tough. We just have to work around that.
Yeah, that's really good. I was also going to say, like, specifically in TFT's case, the data on data sites have specific biases. And so, like, a common thing you'll see on TFT sites is, like, this is the comp that wins the most rounds. And it's like, that may statistically be true, but that doesn't tell you how often they what place they get on average when they're not first, right? And so it creates as I said, a bias like of people that go to these sites and follow these sites, plug and play. They're like, oh, this thing can be the best comp, and realistically, if they were doing something else, they would consistently be getting top 3 or top 2, right? And so like that's why when we mentioned the differential LP delta, that is a lot better of a metric, but it's not a public metric, I don't believe. So it's just viewing the data in a different way, and a lot of players, especially with my time on League and working in the pro scene and working with data like that, there's a lot of biases that different people have when they're not completely aware of how the data works or is gathered or interacts with each other.
Yeah, I also want to add here like a really positive thing that I think these sites provide to a lot of players in our community. There are a lot of people who are just learning TFT for the first time, and outside of the stats that may be somewhat misdirections, giving folks guides or direction as to like what a comp is for the first time you play TFT really helps our community kind of onboard onto the game. And that's one thing I really respect with these things for TFT, but also card games I've played in the past, or even League of Legends when you kind of follow builds the first time you learned the game. They're incredibly helpful, especially for that early part of the community as well. I think we couldn't do what we do without a lot of them.
Beautiful, perfect. So speaking about balancing and looking at different metrics, you guys mentioned the delta. Next question comes in from Worst GPNA. What level of denial do you think is healthy for the game? This set feels like there's more than usual, and I'm wondering how intentional that was. So, for example, he mentions Caston, Tom, Quinn, Graves, in addition to the usual Shroud, Zephyr, Blitzcrank.
Yeah, so denial mechanics in some games can be very frustrating. I think if you look at League of Legends, for example, Imagine you're playing an ADC and you get stunned and then stunned and then stunned, and you literally can't move your character. Feels awful. It feels terrible because you just can't provide input. In an auto battler, I think we can get away with it more because you're not providing input, right? It's changing how the fight plays out. That being said, clearly there's some frustration, right? It's like, I have this 3-item ADC. I want to see him do his thing. I want to watch the excitement. And just kidding, he doesn't get to play the game because he got Sion ulted into Braum ulted into Quinn disarmed into Sion ulted again. So the answer is there definitely has to be a balance. And I think we're fine with CC and we like CC. It's good for pace of combat. It's good for the game. It makes it interesting to watch. But I'm not going to say we've got it perfect, right? And I'll even say, like, right now, for example, on live, when I watch Braum cast 3 times in a row, I'm like, what are we doing? Why is this okay? This isn't okay. As far as everyone's saying the set feels like there's more than usual, there isn't. Every set we go through this where someone says there's more than usual, and usually what it's a result of is 1 or 2 specific CC champions being a little overtuned, or someone has figured out a comp where it's like 1 or 2 damage carries and then 6 CC units have been put together. And that's a set design thing where we just have to make sure that a lot of the CC units aren't synergistic so that you can't run a bunch of them. Like the fact that Blitz, Braum, Sion is one of the best front lines in the game right now, probably not the best thing in the world. So
Yeah. Another important thing to keep in mind with denial as well is clarity. And so to use the League of Legends example, stuns are usually pretty clear in League because they completely lock you out of all of your controls, while silences are something that have been avoided in more recent years since it almost feels like you're lagging. It's like, why are my inputs not happening? That's something that we don't have to worry as much with TFT because it battles itself. But also knowing where these instances come from is the clarity that we need to worry about. And so, like, I think Quinn, maybe you can argue that Valor, like the little projectile, is not loud enough. Maybe it needs to be a little louder, but I typically know that I'm getting disarmed when I'm against Quinn. Versus, like, Tom Kench, especially when you give him blue buff and Socialite and he's just, like, casting immediately after, your units just disappear from the board. And that's something that we can be more cognizant of when we design in the future.
Amazing. And speaking about balancing TFT, but in a different direction, next question comes in from Bumblebee, directed towards Ananda. How has the community response been for Double Up, and do you plan on keeping it around / developing it further?
So thanks for the question. So we've been really happy with where Double Up is performing. You know, it's it's not rocket science to think that or super wizard super game design wizardry to imagine that players might want to play TFT with friends. Um, so yeah, it's not super surprising that it's performing really well. Um, we have a bunch of different scenarios. We have a bunch of different scenarios on to look at in terms of how the numbers are and how and the strength of the player response to decide what to do. The important thing for players to understand about Double Up is it is still very much work in progress. Like we intentionally released it to learn from players. We released it in kind of a a somewhat experimental state, just so we could learn from players what they wanted most. And players have let us know a bunch of things. And so part of the calculation will be about part of the calculation will be about what can we do to improve it. What do we think those improvements, what impact are those improvements going to have? But I think I think it's clear that players expressed a desire and a want for a social mode, and we built one, and they've responded well to it. And so I'm very optimistic about Double Up personally.
Beautiful. And since we're talking to you directly, T10 Dimensional also wants to know, what are some of the strategy games that have inspired you during your career?
Oh gosh. So before I got into digital game design, I was I designed board games, and I still do in my copious spare time. Um, I think so. I mean, there very early on games like Diplomacy and the Old Civilization board game. A lot of historical stuff, And then once I got it, but I mean, I started playing video games when I was 6 years old on an original IBM PC in the 80s. My first game was Zork. But I think just so I'm gonna date myself pretty hard here. I think I the first game design I ever did was probably when I was 7 or 8 and playing an old game called The Ancient Art of War, which I argue is the first RTS. And it came with a scenario builder that you could make different war scenarios on, which you'd then save on your 5.25-inch discs. And it was I made tons and tons of scenarios for it. Yes, thank you, Mort. And that one, yeah, so that one was hugely influential on me. It was the first time I played a game, then I also made stuff for it. I remember in 3rd grade, my sort of hobby show project was levels from Lode Runner, the old Lode Runner. If all of you people want to Google Lode Runner and the Ancient Art of War, you'll see what I'm talking about here. And Lode Runner, the judges were just completely bewildered. They didn't understand, like, for many of them that was like literally the first video game they'd ever seen, and they were like, did you make like the whole game? And I'm like, no, I made the levels. I made these specific levels. And then I guess more recently, obviously, more recently, and by more recently I mean like only 10 years ago, right? It was there was an RTS called Kohan, which I played obsessively, and which was one of the first truly innovative in a genre games that I'd play. It was so creative and innovative in how it approached RTS, and so I definitely wanted to mention that one. And there's the obvious stuff, right? Like the original Civ, um, you know, many games, many games.
Awesome, thank you. Definitely have some games on my new Steam list to try out. We're gonna finish off with
You might have to look on eBay.
probably. We're going to finish off with a few more balance questions, and then we'll move on to our next topic and close out since we only have 20 minutes here. This one goes out to Mort Dog directly from Pikachu. Mort, how do you take in feedback from players? I've recently seen TFT polls, and I think they're a bit underwhelming. His words, not mine, but one in the right direction. And how highly do you see the high elo versus low elo balance as a priority?
Sure. So player feedback is the kind of thing that you have to be really careful with, where, one person having a strong opinion or a small subset of people having a small opinion can actually do some harm, right? And I'll call out, like, for example, if you only look at League of Legends Reddit and that's your entire opinion, you're going to get the wrong opinion. And so the goal with player sentiment and player feedback is to get a wide variety. It's one of the reasons why I actually kind of invested in like the Twitter and the streaming, as well as then we have our own resources like our player surveys and things like that, is to get a wide amount of variety of input. When you get that wide variety, then you can start to look at that and kind of see common themes, common issues, and use that to get kind of a wider understanding. That combined with your own instinct lead to much better results into taking player feedback. So if one player tells me, hey, this comp is frustrating, I mean, cool, that's one data point. If I see a Reddit thread on it, sure, but when like literally all of those things I mentioned are going, where's our Cho'Gath stack counter, I go, TJ, maybe we need to get that on the sprint and start to really prioritize this, because this is really causing a lot of player pain. And so that's kind of how you use that. And then as far as how do you see the high elo versus low elo balance as a priority, this is a spicy answer. But interestingly enough, when we balance TFT, or specifically balance, not design, those are two very different things. When we balance TFT, we are pretending it was computers playing the game. And what I mean by that is like an ultimate perfectionist playing the TFT game. What does that experience look like? Is that balanced? That's what we're balancing around, because it is an auto battler, and so we want to make sure that at the highest level it's balanced. But again, I can't stress this enough. That is different than design. We design for everybody, and so a lot of our designs will actually be like, hey, how does the silver player enjoy this comp? We need to make sure that they have a lot of fun with it. Yordles is a great example where it was a comp that we actually designed to be much more accessible, but in practicality actually ended up being very difficult to execute on. Specifically like 6 Yordle, it's like a lot of bench management, knowing when to re-roll, knowing when, and like, so in that regard, like Yordles is kind of a miss, but that's kind of the difference between design and balance, for example.
Gotcha. Okay, and talking about ranked, this question comes in. I was P3 when this happened. About 275 games played within the set. An eighth nets me minus 76 LP, but 2 firsts net me plus 30, plus 32. Can you explain why this is happening?
Yeah, TJ, you want me to take this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a dirty one because the reality of the situation is that behind the scenes we have a ranked matchmaking system, and the goal of a matchmaking system is to get you to play with people who are at your skill level. And so any game you're having, there's that behind the scenes system where it's like, hey, please play with the people that are the same skill level as you. This creates fair matches, things like that. And it's debatable if that's actually the perfect system for TFT, but that's the system we're using right now. And so oftentimes when your rank and your MMR get mismatched, what happens is the game is going, hey, you're higher ranked than you should be. We kind of need to pull you back down. It feels freaking terrible, but that's what's going on. And again, I think it's debatable here. There are a lot of players in the situation you're describing where their rank is higher than the MMR, especially now that we added the demotion protection. Because, let's say you're Diamond 4 0 LP and then you lose 100 games. Obviously, your MMR is going to be low. Now, the question everyone jumps to is, well, then why not just show your MMR? And the reality is, because MMR can often lead to some really bad situations also, right? Where it's like, imagine you get in a game, but the matchmaking put you with people, lower MMR than you, and so you get third and lose MMR, and so that can feel really bad. And so coming up with the perfect ranked plus matchmaking system is something that no game has really cracked the perfect code for. Every system has its problems. This is currently our biggest problem as far as the rank matchmaking goes, is like, how do we avoid these bad feels? You're right, they feel bad, but that's kind of the behind the scenes of what's going on, and maybe we'll crack that code someday.
Yeah, and speaking about rank, this question actually comes in from our friend Gangly. Now that it's been in place for a few months, do you think the change to remove demotion from certain ranks has been positive or a negative change?
Ananda, you want to take that one? Actually, he's deafened. Okay, so generally, again, this is where, again, there's pros and cons, right? But the real answer is it's positive. If you look at the pros and cons, it's positive. A lot of players have been more willing to go, I reached a new rank threshold. I'm willing to keep playing. I hit Diamond 4. That was my threshold. Cool. Keep playing. And they get to experiment and feel good about it, still get their rank rewards. And that's a great thing. That's awesome. It has come with side effects, like I just mentioned, where it's like you hit Diamond 4, lose 100 games, and now you're plus 15 for a first and minus 92 for an eighth. Feels bad. But overall, the pros have outweighed the cons, and we should definitely be doing it. So
Beautiful. And moving on to our last topic here, we're going to be talking about now and tomorrow. And then we're going to be wrapping up in 15 minutes. So let's try and make some ground here. Question comes in from Shobu. Is it hard to bring in people to the game, or is it actually harder to keep them into the game?
Good to answer that one. It's a bit of both, and it, as all complex answers, it depends. There is for sure a difficult learning curve of learning TFT in the very beginning. So I think to start off, it is hard to bring people into TFT just to start. There's a lot of context that being a League player helps with, and there's a lot of the reason why we're able to have a very easy start in terms of getting players who have League context to come play TFT, but now have a very difficult start in terms of getting folks now to learn the game. We're working towards that, but it is still difficult. I totally acknowledge that. I think we see the first 3 games are the most difficult for players to kind of grasp the concept of TFT. But once it happens, one thing that we've found is that players stick and love the hell out of this game. It's an industry metric, but retention is something we care a lot about. And people, once they get past that hurdle, are very, very retentive as it relates to like other games in the market. And I think that shows that people can really love TFT if they can get over that hump, and that's kind of something we're invested in doing, is making that onboarding experience, making it easier to find the fun in TFT. And one way we want to do that actually is, making it easier to play with a friend. Double Up is a great example of, I've heard so many anecdotal stories, including even myself, where people bring, an SO or one of their friends to come learn TFT in that environment, and that's one way we can do that. And there's so many more that we still plan to do. But that's like some high level on that topic.
You touch base on our next question that comes in from Full Billy Laughs, who wants to know if there's anything on the roadmap or that's upcoming that can help players either better understand or just get better at TFT. He says, as a new player, I feel like I'm missing a lot of fundamentals from missing the first 2 years of the game. Coaching has helped, but curious if Riot has any plans to bridge that gap for newer players.
We totally do. I don't want to spoil or commit to anything, but you can take my word that we're looking at the kind of onboarding experience as to like how you learn the core concepts. We're also looking at standardizing ways in which core concepts are represented in TFT, so that when we do transition sets, information is more easily carried over. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles we've heard from players, both active and new players, that depending on when you join, you might actually be coming in towards the later half of a set where there's a lot of context on the game that's already been developed by the community, and then all of a sudden things just change. That's one place we want to invest in, as well as just general basics of TFT. I'm not sure, most folks don't actually notice this because the only way you would is if you create a new account, but we updated the tutorial recently. The team did a great job during set 5. The tutorial now is agnostic to the set, so it's actually just a basic experience that you can learn the core of TFT, and then you'll transition to the active set. We still need to kind of create a bridge between those two steps, but over the next year, maybe more, we do plan to continue to invest in that experience, because new players, to be honest, are the lifeblood of what makes TFT continue to grow, continue to be successful, as well as you all. And it's going to be a mix of both making you all happy, as well as folks who are trying TFT for the first time happy.
Amazing. He also asks as well, is there anything on the roadmap that's coming to help for more ways to enjoy TFT? Currently, it feels like ranked is all I can do as a player. Will there ever be something like event queues within the app? For example, like, can I pay RP to join an event and participants could win and earn cosmetics?
Funny you say that. Next week is one of our... we've done an event before, Skyglass. Our very first Super MVP was an attempt at that. Next week is the Lunar New Year event. There'll be things to progress and do. There'll be a little story where you can kind of give gifts to little legends. It's really cute. It's really fun. This is just the first step. We do plan to add more progression, more things to do that aren't just ranked related to TFT, so that, like you mentioned, have, or like you asked, more goals and things to kind of strive for. So do check out that event next week. Give us feedback, because that is us testing the waters in that space. Do you like these little story narratives? Do you like these progression missions with free rewards and kind of a narrative wrapper that is unrelated to the set? I think that will unlock a lot more opportunity for us to do more of that. But also, there are other things we're talking about on the progression space that are agnostic to events.
Perfect. And Nair Latresh actually asks, with things like Hyperreal starting as custom labs that was expected to be shuffled out 6 months later, and now with Double Up, are we still looking to create more labs? I think Anand answered this a little bit earlier. Are we still looking to create more labs in the future, or are we worried about fragmenting the player base with 4+ modes?
I think Anand was AFK, but I could help answer that. Oh, go ahead, Mort.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say Ananda's AFK. Basically, the way we look at it is like there's not a specific reason to just make more labs. Like we're not on a lab treadmill. We're not going to keep making labs. Labs are specifically if we find a player need that needs to be solved that the main mode cannot, then we will definitely pursue it. For example, hyper mode was shorter game length for people who don't have 35 minutes. Double Up was so people can play with their friends. If we find a new need, we will develop a new lab to try to serve that need. But until then, that's it. And so, like I said, we're not trying to make a lab content treadmill here.
Perfect. Beautiful. I'm going to breeze by these last 3 questions here, and then we'll just close up. Dumdies asks, are there any plans or discussions regarding a TFT practice tool?
I'm taking this one because I have strong feels. If you remember, I mentioned that the excitement of TFT is already novelty and like, oh, I can't wait to try this crazy thing. A practice tool will basically allow you to go in, see all the cool novel things in an hour, and go, well, that was neat, and never play again. So there is no world where we would ever do a practice tool as long as I'm here. I will vehemently stop it. It never is going to happen. It will ruin the game. No.
Perfect. Pause Dravite Kevu. Ask, what are the plans for a spectate/replay feature?
Okay, I can take this one. It's definitely a complex topic, and there's a lot of nuance when we use the word spectate or replay. So I'm gonna try and break it down the best I can. There's the competitive aspect, which is the thing we recently shipped to players that we strongly believe in is making it better for viewers like you all to watch competitive TFT events without having to rely on the player's camera perspective, but can be controlled by an observer. That thing we're super invested in and want to continue to improve upon. And then there's the other one, which is either observing live active games within TFT of your friends or watching games of people playing TFT. We don't currently have any plans to invest in that space because we don't believe that we could be the best at doing so. We think there are other tools out there who are just going to provide you a much, much better experience and being able to watch your friend or someone else's gameplay in a way that we just can't keep up with. And instead, we'll be partnering with tools like those as our strategy versus creating our very own unique, bespoke spectator, player spectator tool.
Great. And this question actually comes in from me. With the conjunction of TFT and Arcane, we definitely saw some huge long-term planning from the dev team. Is this something we can expect to be a reoccurring thing in TFT?
Almost certainly,
I
I
hope
think. Oh, go
doing
ahead.
long-term planning.
Yeah. Almost certainly, yeah. We will continue to partner with broader Riot when it makes sense, and other times we'll be doing our own cool things. So it'll be a mix of both, but you could definitely expect, hopefully, some point in the future, if Riot has a really big event like Arcane again, TFT will definitely want to be a part of it.
Amazing, perfect. Well, that's all the questions I have for you guys today. I wanted to give a big thank you for coming to do this Q&A with us. I know, some of these questions you've probably answered many times before. Thank you, Mort. And it's a really cool opportunity to have all of us send in questions and be able to actually have them answered and listen to you guys do it in real time. So first of all, just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. Second, I'm curious to hear what you're excited for this year when it comes to TFT. What, without releasing anything that you might not be able to. What are you excited about for TFT in 2022?
I'll go first so that we can close with the smarter people. So I'm going to say that we have made a decision about TFT that you'll hear about soonish. And that decision in particular has me very excited for the future of the game. And so, yeah, once we talk about that decision, I'm just so excited for what it means for TFT in the future of the game. So, yeah.
Perfect. This one kind of went out to everyone. So does anyone else want to jump in?
I'll go next. Cliche, but I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I am very excited about the next set's theme. Personally, huge fan of what it is. One of my favorite thematics, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, perfect.
I'm really excited and looking forward to the future of the esports and competitive scene for TFT. My background makes me very biased, but as I've interacted with it more and see the potential it has, I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Perfect. That's your expertise. And Christine, Chloe, did you want to close this out?
I'm thinking. Chloe, did you have anything on you that you wanted to share?
There is a unit in 6.5 that's the unit I'm most excited about, but none of you get to know what it is. Ooh.
Get wrecked, nerds.
I am excited for TFT in general, just the game in general, but also for the team as well. I don't know which one specifically Mort is referring to, but I think some of you may have already seen articles around, TFT expanding and hiring more, and I'm just excited to grow the team, and be able to, work with different people and like create even more content for all of you, and and do more of this. Actually, I think this has been really, really fun. So, I think no matter what, I'm excited for 2022 and use that as a learning opportunity. as well, so that we can get better. And we definitely want to hear more of your feedback, so that we can improve. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I think I'd love to give you guys the last few minutes of the time we have here and just let us know, all the listeners, how can we help push this game further? What can we do for you guys?
Tell your parents to play, your brothers, your sisters, your friends, your family, all of them. Play TFT. Just kidding.
Just get everyone to play TFT, sure.
I can't even get my brother to play TFT, but yeah, maybe that's a goal.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. That's pretty much everything we got. Thank you to everyone who worked really hard to make this happen. And I didn't really plan my outro. I worked so hard to plan the intro and in the middle of the show. I didn't plan this part of it, but thank you for coming. It's been an honor to speak with all of you and be able to bombard you guys with questions. I hope you all have wonderful days, and thank you for putting together this amazing game that we're all, sitting at our computers listening to even talk about. So thank you once again.
Thanks for having us. Smoke bomb.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thanks
Cool.
for
Well,
having
that's it.
us.
That's everything we have, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'm probably gonna smoke bomb too. See ya.